You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg.
The film industry, with all its glamour and glitz, is among the biggest in the world.
The Emmy
And the Oscar.
and the Grammy goes to...
With a whooping net worth of almost $150 billion.
Give me my money.
Hollywood alone accounts for around $43 billion of those dollars, thus cementing it as the most valuable national film industry in the world.
Money was literally taken overnight, and it was just sent around the world and used to make Hollywood movies.
However, with the big bucks, there also comes a set of activities that happen under the table, and one of them happens to be money laundering.
Investigators have called it one of the biggest corruption cases ever.
So today we're going to look at how Hollywood is often exploited for financial crimes that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. The Hollywood money laundering hoopla. Just by looking at the overall influence of the crime, we can say that money laundering is a serious and widespread issue that affects many industries around the world. One of the industries that have been identified as particularly vulnerable to money laundering is the film industry, most notably Hollywood. With the potential for large sums of money to be moved around and the complexity of film financing structures, the film industry can be an attractive target for money launderers. If we were to define it, then money laundering is the process of disguising the proceeds of illegal activity as legitimate funds. This is typically done in three crucial stages: placement, layering, and integration. The placement stage involves introducing illegal funds into the financial system, which is often done by depositing cash into a bank account. Of course, it's not as simple as it sounds because you'll need to provide the necessary reasons to explain the sums of cash being deposited. The auditors will most definitely take note of any suspicious amounts coming in, and the film industry is known for always playing in the millions. So how does placement end up serving its purpose? That's simple with layering. The layering stage involves moving the funds through various and highly complex transactions to obscure their origin and make them more challenging to trace. Now, this is pretty obvious because if you were to just transfer money from one source to the other, then the tax authorities would be onto you faster than Usain Bolt's world record. By sourcing the money and then distributing it across various channels, it becomes relatively easy to hide your footprints and avoid the long arm of the law. This ensures that your illegal cash is getting put into a recognized institution without anyone having to call you out on it. Okay, so now that the money has been transferred to your legitimate bank account, how do you make use of it? That's pretty simple. You integrate it. The integration stage is the final step that allows you to turn your black money into white. It involves reintroducing your funds into the economy as apparently legitimate income or investments. Criminals have counted on such methods for ages, and films such as Scarface and American Gangster have done a somewhat decent job in showcasing how people end up washing their money through multiple sources. One of these sources, ironically, happens to be the same industry that made these films. Money laundering is a global problem that affects many industries, the most notable ones being banking and real estate. But this does not mean that the film industry is any less of a prominent source. Criminal organizations and individuals may attempt to launder their funds through the film industry by investing in film productions or using film financing structures to move money around. These activities can be difficult to detect and can have serious implications for the integrity of the financial system. Chapter 2. To what extent is Hollywood involved in this? The use of the film industry as a vehicle for money laundering is a growing concern for authorities all over the world, especially in America, where the amount of money being pumped into Hollywood is of astronomical proportions. Gone are the days when the most expensive movies be at around $50 or $60 million. Nowadays, even low-value movies are being made with budgets as high as $200 to $300 million. And that allows for a lot of cash getting lost in translation. Criminal organizations and individuals are very well aware of the potential to launder large sums of illegal funds through the complex financing structures of film productions, which is why they are drawn to this particular route. Of course, there's also the fact that Hollywood is filled with glamour and famous names, and it acts as yet another motivator for the wrongdoers to channel their funds here in the hopes of getting to meet their favorite stars. This has led to increased scrutiny by regulators and industry participants, with a particular focus on Hollywood due to its high profile and large-scale productions. It is also why massive mergers such as the Disney Fox and Warner Bros. Discovery are met with general criticism all the time, as they primarily aim to gain higher stakes in the industry, which would in turn allow the entertainment companies to move more money around in the form of production costs and miscellaneous expenses. Examples of money laundering in the film industry are pretty much everywhere, but it does not always have to do with big budget productions. A lot of times, there's scope with independent film productions as well. As a matter of fact, in the modern world, these indie films are often used as a means to launder money through private investors, as they fall under the general radar. Additionally, film financing structures such as special purpose vehicles and bond issuances have been exploited by money launderers seeking to obscure the origin of their funds. With provisions for subsidies also available to indie filmmakers, they become easy targets for criminals who are looking for a way to divert their shady earnings. To combat money laundering in the film industry, regulators have implemented guidelines and regulations aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. Due diligence on investors and transactions, as well as the reporting of suspicious activity, have become the standard practice in the industry, although it's hard to say how accurate and helpful they've been. While money laundering in the film industry remains a concern, continued vigilance and cooperation between industry participants and regulators can help mitigate its effects and ensure the integrity of the financial system. Chapter 3. How does an independent film wash money? For those of you who don't know, an independent film is a movie that is not backed by a big studio or any major investors. They are made with extremely low budgets and do not get a lot of distribution. This means that most of their funding specifics are not publicly disclosed and easier to keep hidden. Such movies are also more profitable when compared to big budget productions. Let me explain how this works. Now, when you're sorting out the economics of a movie, there are various costs that come into making the film itself. First of all, you have the actual production budget. This will include set costs, stage setup, actor salaries, staff salaries, equipment rentals, lighting, and several other costs. However, this is not all. There are also marketing and distribution costs to take into consideration. Once you add these costs to a big budget production, the break-even point reaches up to 3 times or even 4 times the production budget. So in essence, a film that costs $50 million to make may need to make $200 million just to make a profit. Of course, this also depends on various other factors such as distribution deals and the breakup of box office collections between global and domestic grosses. Let's take Barbie vs. Oppenheimer as an example to understand how this method works. Barbie was 2023's highest grossing film, with a global gross of over $1.4 billion. That's a lot of cash, isn't it? Now, the production budget of this film was $145 million, which is somewhat fair considering modern economics, especially when you're bringing in stars like Ryan Gosling and Margot Robbie into the mix. However, what we also need to consider is that the marketing expenditure was a ridiculous $150 million, making it one of the very few cases where a high-profile film spent more money on its marketing than actually making the movie itself. So that comes to a total of $295 million. And then there are distribution costs as well. So if we were to make an estimated guess, then after taxes, the film must have made a tentative profit of around $400 million, which is a lot of cash. Please keep in mind that I'm not considering brand partnerships, as it's hard to calculate the monetary values of these deals, especially when they're on confidential contracts. Now, let's compare it to Oppenheimer, which made close to $1 billion, which was considerably lesser than Barbie's gross. However, there are several factors to consider here, the most important one being that Oppenheimer is a R-rated film, which means it was being shown to a limited audience, unlike Barbie, which had a wide release and could be watched by kids as well. Now, the film's production budget was $100 million, and the marketing budget was somewhere between $60 to $80 million. Let's take the upper end of the spectrum and assume the total cost to be $180 million. With distribution costs coming in, the film would have still made a profit of at least $500 to $600 million, which makes it more profitable than Barbie. Once again, I'm not counting back-end deals like the one Christopher Nolan made with Warner Bros. To get a cut of the film's profits. The example I just gave you covered 2 of the highest-grossing films of 2023, and even in such a case, you can see the vast difference in profits just by having a lower budget. Now imagine the same thing, but with a film that has a total marketing and production cost of $15 or $20 million. You would only need to make roughly $40 million to hit a profit if you're only looking at the box office revenue. Another factor that has come in now is the massive influence of streaming services such as Netflix and Amazon Prime. These digital distributors will take up movies produced by other studios in exchange for a fee, and in the case of independent films, it's a straightforward deal. For example, suppose an indie film costs $10 million to make. Netflix will pay the producers around $12 to $15 million to put it up on their streaming service, and they'll also do the marketing for the movie. It's a total win for the studio. And then there are cases like Uncut Gems, which costed only $19 million, sold its streaming rights to Netflix, and also made $50 million upon a limited box office release. It's easy money with lower budgets, which is why studios like Blumhouse Productions crack deals like the one they made with Amazon Prime that covered multiple films. This is one of the reasons why so many people are getting into the film industry, as streaming has made it easier for smaller films to make money. However, it has also allowed criminals to enter the industry with their shady money and wash it clean thanks to the law of percentages. Even though it's not a lot of cash that can be pumped into a single indie film, this provision allows for investors to fund multiple films from the same production house over a period of time. By putting in their illegal funds to independent film productions, criminals can use the profits made by these movies to legitimize their money and walk away with no questions asked. Additionally, shell companies can be used to invest in film productions and further criminal enterprises. This is actually a very common practice, and some of the biggest frauds in the world have had involvement from such activities. Chapter 4. What scandals have involved Hollywood? When it comes to money laundering, Hollywood has been involved in quite a few scandals, and it does not necessarily have to be limited to film production. Influential names in the industry have also been involved in dubious activities, and I'm going to highlight a couple of them for you today. Let's start with the most famous one of them all, the Panama Papers. The Panama Papers scandal was one of the most significant data leaks in the history of mankind. It had shed light on the indeterminate world of offshore tax havens and illegal financial transactions. A whole bunch of confidential documents from the Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca were central to the scandal, as they contained some extremely sensitive information that shook the whole world. The legal company had assisted wealthy people and corporations all over the world in establishing offshore shell firms in order to conceal their assets and avoid paying taxes, and that too without any legal ramifications. As a matter of fact, even after getting exposed, there was no considerable action taken against these celebrities and companies, other than public outrage and a few ministers resigning from their posts. The leak of the Panama Papers revealed that several film production companies, such as the British company Amadeus Pictures, were being used to launder money for people in high-ranking positions of authority. Amadeus Pictures was allegedly used to launder a whopping $700 million through a network of shell companies. The funny thing is that there isn't a lot of information available online when it comes to this company, and a lot of conspiracy theorists have stated that it could be because of the involvement of some high-profile names that could not afford to have more information leaked out to the public. So, what does Hollywood have to do with these papers? Apart from names like Donald Trump, there were several stars who were also mentioned in the leak. Indian Bollywood stars such as Amitabh Bachchan and Ajay Devgan were heavily involved, as were British actors like Emma Watson. But one name that probably shocked everyone was American director Stanley Kubrick, who has been regularly considered to be the greatest director of all time. What's really shocking about this is the fact that Kubrick had passed away in 1999, just before the release of his final feature film, Eyes Wide Shut. The Panama leak happened in 2016, which meant that this was going on for a considerably long period of time before the people involved got exposed. Stanley Kubrick was respected and loved by studios, filmmakers, and cinephiles all over the world, but he also had an estimated personal worth of over $20 million at the time of his death in 1999, which made him one of the richest directors in the world at the time, especially if you take inflation into consideration. A lot of this wealth was invested in an 18th century English manor that Kubrick had bought in 1978. He lived in that manor for the rest of his life, even filming scenes from his classics such as The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut over there. One thing to note is that Stanley Kubrick had shifted to England around 1961, and he never moved out of the country till his demise. Kubrick was a famously eccentric filmmaker, and he wasn't really known for being savvy with his taxes, but it turns out he was probably ahead of the curve in the worlds of cinema as well as finance. Kubrick had moved to the English countryside while working on his hugely controversial film, Lolita. The primary reason for this, as stated by his wife Christiane, was because there was a tax allowance for American films Kubrick's family remained for the filming, and then they went back to New York. The family returned to England once again to film Dr. Strangelove, and this time they stayed. Christiane stated that her husband really liked the European atmosphere. He seemed to have liked the tax regime, which made filming, according to Christiane, as much as 40% cheaper than it was in America. The British, in Kubrick's opinion, were also much less judgmental of films like Lolita, as well as of his predilection for the unnervingly risky method of making movies. He had also stated that the reason for his moving to England was because places in London had better filming locations and studio sets than America. But even then, he would often replicate areas in New York and other American cities by bringing in production props and other such equipment. All of this costed money, so it did not seem too economical from a business perspective, even though the rest of his arguments in favor of the subsidies had made sense. However, Kubrick was so respected as a director that the studios would blindly listen to him, and they'd never even interrupt him on set, providing him with complete creative control of his films. This sounds fair enough to the layman, but things take a very different meaning once you realize how he was connected to the Panama Papers. 3 holding companies set up by Mossack Fonseca now own the manor bought by Kubrick. and are in turn held by trusts that were set up for his children and grandchildren. Since Kubrick was an American living in Britain, without the trust, his estate would have had to pay transfer taxes to both the American and British governments, which would have amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. On top of that, he would have possibly been forced to sell the property in order to obtain the liquid assets to pay off these transfer fees. Kubrick is buried on the grounds along with one of his daughters, and the rest of his family still lives there without having to pay a single penny or cent extra for the transfer. One important thing to note is that Kubrick was never implied to have done anything illegal, which means that he was simply being smart with his funds, the 1MDB scandal. So I've already done a video on this topic, so you can check it out if you want a more detailed breakdown on how this one unfolded. Essentially what happened here was that a Malaysian state wealth fund was used to launder billions of dollars through various industries, including the film industry. Some of the funds were used to finance the Hollywood movie The Wolf of Wall Street, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Margot Robbie, directed by Martin Scorsese and produced by Red Granite Pictures. The film was co-produced by the stepson of the then Malaysian Prime Minister, Najib Razak. The scam was worth a staggering $11 billion. Event though pundits say that the amount was a lot more than the stated figure. How did Hollywood get involved here though? Basically, the funds from 1MDB were supposed to be utilized towards the benefit of the Malaysian people, but Najib and some other perpetrators, especially a businessman Jio Lo, who had strong connections in the film industry and utilized them to live a lavish lifestyle. Now, the criminals from this case had managed to divert a lot of their funds by using various channels, and the film industry happened to be one of them. The Wolf of Wall Street wasn't the only movie they used to wash their money either. Daddy's Home and Dumb and Dumber 2 were also funded with the illegal cash. All three films made profits, but as expected, it was The Wolf of Wall Street that made the most noise globally. It also had the most money attached to it, with as much as $155 million being used to pay for the production budget as well as the marketing expenses of the film. As a matter of fact, Joe Low was so attached to this movie that the end credits even thanked him for his contributions to the film. Basically, Najib and Joe Low were able to place Najib's stepson Riza Aziz into Red Granite Pictures as a co-founder. This way, the money that was coming in from Riza could be shown as a capital investment into the company for the purposes of funding the various movies that came under scrutiny. They were able to get by for a while, because no one really thought to question the cash coming in from Riza, especially because he had brought this money from Malaysia and not America. Of course, this didn't last long for the perpetrators as they got caught in the act and had all their fraudulent activities exposed. In June of 2017, the Department of Justice had managed to sort out the discrepancies between Red Granite Pictures and the misused funds from 1MDB, after which it began a whole set of corrective measures to recover as much money as they could. They even succeeded in this measure by extracting more than $1 billion from the people who were close to Najib and his 1MDB scam. It helped that there are lots of highly valued assets to their names, so the DOJ only had to seize these assets to make up for the liquid cash injections into Red Granite. These assets included extremely posh properties owned by the penetrators in luxurious residences from Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, Manhattan, New York City, and London. It didn't end there, as the authorities were able to seize a whole bunch of fine artwork that was being held at these properties. Since Joe Low loved living the high life, he also had a selection of flashy rides, such as a private jet and a luxury yacht. Finally, the DOJ got their hands on royalties from The Wolf of Wall Street, Daddy's Home, and Dumb and Dumber 2. Now, you guys must be thinking that royalties won't amount to much as films usually earn most of their revenue during the theatrical run. However, with streaming coming to the picture again, the rights to these films can be sold at considerable prices to platforms like Netflix. And it's not just Leonardo DiCaprio's blockbuster that can command such rates. It's important to point out that even though Daddy's Home was made on a budget of $50 million, it still made over $240 million at the box office, so it was quite profitable. Probably even more than The Wolf of Wall Street. So yes, the royalties from these films were substantial, and it made sense to claim them from Red Granite Pictures. Naturally, the producers didn't want to be run over so badly, so they decided to strike a deal with the government. It was the 7th of March 2018 when the matter got settled in the California courts, with the producers of these films agreeing to pay a total of $60 million as the consolation fee. The case came to a close in August 2018. But there was a condition stated in the settlement which had stipulated that Red Granite making the payment to settle the case should not be misunderstood as an admission of guilt or any kind of liability on their part. Even Leonardo DiCaprio ended up returning the gifts that he had received from Joe Low as a way of doing his bit to ease the situation. These gifts included an Oscar received from Marlon Brando and paintings from artists such as Picasso. FIFA scandal. Okay, so this one was not directly linked to the film industry, but the FIFA scandal did involve the use of the film production company Tornio's Y Competencias to launder bribe money, so it does fit the bill and deserves a small mention. One of the conspirators in this case is Alejandro Burzaco, a corrupt businessman who used the company to launder the money he received as part of the ploy to bribe officials into handing over the broadcasting rights of the FIFA matches to him. In 2017, Alejandro even told jurors he paid at least 30 people more than $160 million to secure broadcasting rights to South American tournaments and World Cup matches in 2026 and 2030. Of course, the FIFA scandal of 2015 in itself was a global sensation that shook the world, but that caters to a whole different kind of scam, so maybe we'll cover that in another video. Chapter 5: Hollywood gets scammed by Bernie Madoff. So, we've spoken about the various ways how Hollywood has been used to scam the system, but there have been cases where even celebrities and film executives had been duped without knowing it. The most common form of fraud over here is when a trusted advisor misleads the celebrity to invest their money in a scheme that is misrepresented as a popular one. What this does is bring additional funds to the scam via renowned individuals while also gaining some kind of credibility via their participation. One of the most prominent examples of this can be seen in Bernie Madoff's infamous Ponzi scheme of 2009, which amounted to a total fraud of around $65 billion and 40,000 victims. The former investor faced 11 charges including securities fraud, investment advisor fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering, false statements, perjury, false SEC filings, and theft from an employee benefit plan. He was expected to serve a sentence of 150 years in prison, but passed away at the age of 82 in the middle of it. Now, I'm not going to talk about the specifics of his scam because, as you can see, there's a lot to cover there. But I do want to point out to all the relevant people who fell victim to Madoff's methods. First up, we have former Walt Disney Studios chairman and Wonder Colorado managing partner Jeffrey Katzenberg. He held his position at Walt Disney Studios from 1984 to 1994 and later went on to become the co-founder and CEO of DreamWorks Animation in 1994. Katzenberg lost a total of $20 million in the Madoff financial scandal through a studio executive business manager, according to the LA Times. Shortly after Madoff was arrested, Katzenberg told CNBC via Deadline, quote, "I'm blessed and fortunate in that this is extremely painful and humiliating for me. It has done extraordinary damage to my philanthropy and the giving that my wife and I is so important to us. What it has done to other people is terrible. It's destroyed many people's lives, people that I know. It is something deeply wrong with our process and something we all should be ashamed of, that a man could swindle $50 billion. And forget me, but I'm talking about people who have taken their lives over this. It's a disgrace, yes. He lost millions of dollars and got very serious about the way people were able to pull off such crimes. But there's another important point to note. It's actually a funny pointer about this case which states that Jeffrey didn't exactly engage with Madoff himself, but through a Hollywood financial advisor named Gerald Breslauer. As expected, Gerald himself also suffered heavy losses related to Madoff's scheme, as per the Wall Street Journal. Next is Hollywood star Kevin Bacon and his wife Kyra Sedgwick. The Footloose star explained that he and Kyra were essentially drawn to the promise of a high return on their investment with Madoff, but in hindsight, he feels that the tantalizing figures should have been a warning sign for him at the time. In an interview with the Smart Less podcast, he said, and I quote, "There's obvious life lessons there. If something is too good to be true, it's too good to be true." Despite the massive financial hit he took, Bacon admitted that he didn't expect to receive much sympathy for what he experienced. In his own words, he said, "I think people will be not happy to hear me whining about money." Indeed, despite saying that he was angry at the time, Bacon remained well aware that he was still in a relatively fortunate situation compared to some of Madoff's other victims. He said, "There were a lot of people who were much worse off than we were old people. People whose retirement funds were completely decimated. There's always going to be somebody that's going to have it a lot worse than you." Bacon also mentioned that he had recouped a certain portion of his losses in the years since this event had passed, but he has not yet negated his losses completely. Instead of letting the negative circumstances get the best of them, Bacon believes that he and his wife will continue to focus on the positives in their life. Madoff also got to one of the greatest directors of all time, Steven Spielberg. He may have been known for his philanthropic efforts, but even charities and foundations were not exempt from Bernie Madoff's scams. Through Spielberg's charity, the Wunderkinder Foundation, he lost approximately $340,000 to the Ponzi scheme. He allegedly invested nearly 70% of the foundation's money in 2006 and lost it amidst Madoff's run, as reported by The Express. Now, the next victim isn't exactly a celebrity made from Hollywood. but he was hugely popular and had ends with the who's who of the film industry. Yes, even Larry King could not escape Madoff's grasp at the time, as can be seen in his dealings with him. According to NBC News, Larry King lost about $700,000 after directly trusting Madoff to invest his money. Thankfully for King, he was able to get his losses back from the Madoff estate and the government for taxes he and his wife paid on the stock that didn't exist. There's one more actor who managed to get scammed by Madoff, and it happens to be John Malkovich. The star, known for movies such as Dangerous Liaisons and Red, lost millions of dollars in Madoff's scam, which he later revealed were actually all of his savings. Yes, he literally trusted Madoff with all his cash and ended up losing it. According to an interview with the Irish Times, Malkovich and his partner Nicoletta Perrin stated that they had followed the advice of a business manager and invested with Madoff as per his suggestions. The decision came at a cost, and the actor revealed that, quote, "Everything I'd ever made was gone. Normally, this would put any person in a rather disturbed state. But Malkovich didn't let this get to him. Despite being financially devastated, he kept a steadfast attitude which helped him move forward in life as well as his career. In his own words, I don't think it mattered that much. We just made changes to the way we lived and the money we spent. I had to do more work that paid for a number of years and work all the time. And I stopped paying for everything. I just stopped paying for friends and family for a time." Well, that sure seemed to have made a big difference in his life. Because Malkovich is all good once again despite being cheated by Madoff. So yes, Hollywood might be guilty of a lot of things when it comes to money laundering, but as shown in the examples I just spoke about, there's a lot that happens on both sides of the coin. But an issue is still an issue regardless of the victims, so how on earth does a government deal with such high-profile crimes? Chapter 6. What measures are being taken to counter these frauds? So we can now safely say that Hollywood is a massive channel for laundering money, especially when it's coming from foreign sources. This has been an ongoing process for years and years, but there is still no end to the vicious cycle. The real question, though, is whether the authorities have actually tried to make a difference here. The answer to that is yes, but not a very enthusiastic one. Let me explain. A lot of regulatory measures have been implemented ever since incidents such as the Panama Papers and 1MDB scam came to light. The primary purpose of these measures was to increase transparency and accountability in order to prevent money laundering in the film industry. These measures include a particular set of vetting procedures. Let's take a look at them. First up is the standard Know Your Customer or KYC regulations. The purpose of having a KYC prerequisite is to validate the identity of the organization. The issuing authorities would require financial institutions and other businesses to not just identify but also verify the identity of their customers as well. In the film industry, this means performing due diligence on investors and other parties involved in film production to ensure that their funds have a legitimate source. This way, even foreign funds will need to go through a verification process. However, businesses can find a way around this if they have a team of accountants and lawyers advising them. Next up is the Suspicious Activity Reports, also known as SARs. These reports are usually filed by financial institutions and other businesses when they detect any kind of suspicious activity that may indicate money laundering or other possible financial crimes. Most of the times, such reports are filed whenever a targeted organization gets audited. SARs enable law enforcement agencies to investigate potential criminal activity and take appropriate action before it's too late. While such a measure is known to have a higher efficiency, it is also highly dependent on the entity that files the reports in the first place. After all, anything can be manipulated at the right price. Now, let's take a look at the anti-money laundering programs. Also referred to as AML programs, they are designed to prevent money laundering and other financial crimes by establishing internal policies, procedures, and controls within the industry itself. In the case of Hollywood and other such industries, this may include implementing due diligence measures on investors and other parties involved in film production, as well as training employees on how to detect and report suspicious activity. This way, even if a lower-end staff member notices something shady in the production process, they can report it to the concerned authorities. However, most of the time, such people simply submit to the power of those above them, so efficiency rates are not very dependable. Finally, we have increased reporting requirements. In the recent years, regulators have increased the reporting requirements for the film industry to help detect and prevent money laundering. For example, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network requires certain film industry participants to file reports on cash transactions over a certain amount. This is basically done to keep a track of individuals and businesses that frequently deal in cash. Once again, this is highly dependent on the people who are filing and assessing the reports. Chapter 7 Conclusion. In conclusion, The film industry has been used as a tool for money laundering in various high-profile cases in recent years. Film production has been particularly vulnerable to these activities too due to its relatively low oversight and flexible financing structures. While regulatory measures have been implemented to prevent money laundering in the industry, it remains a challenge to detect and prevent these crimes. It is crucial for regulators, industry participants, and the public to remain vigilant and cooperate to combat these threats and preserve the integrity of the film industry. Like, share, and subscribe if you like the video, and feel free to suggest any topics you'd like to see in my future videos. See you soon.